Hello and welcome back to noopod, the monthly podcast where EarthSkyLab meets Nooma Studio to discuss building a better future for humanity. The purpose of the show is to reach an audience of like-minded individuals and to develop a discourse around our own personal practices. I'm Ramzi Yasser, a spatial practitioner from London, and in 2019 I set up Nooma, a collaborative platform concerned with turning disused space to public advantage. And it's with great pleasure that I hand over to my co-host, Victor Vorsky.
Hi, Ramzi. Nice to meet you here again online. In exciting times. So I'm Victor. I'm from the EarthSkyLab project, and this reality that's coming around with everybody working remotely and kind of staying away from each other. I mean, I wasn't hoping for staying away each other. I was hoping for everybody to move out into the countryside, but it's similar. This is not how I expected it to come about, but it's certainly moving in the direction which I always said things would do. So I'm very interested to talk with you today about what we think the future will look like after this, both for construction and where people live, but in this case today, in terms of how architectural practice will evolve. So maybe do you want to intro today's topic a bit more?
Yes, well, just some context for some of our listeners in the future. Today is April 14th. We are going into the fourth week of the lockdown in the UK for
4 weeks, but who's counting?
COVID-19. It's a very strange time, and it going into the fourth week, self-isolation and lockdown almost seems like normality. So it's very interesting how quickly we can adapt. Now, Victor and I have been very interested in the topic of remote work, and very much today we would like to discuss the age of remote work in relation to the architect, because architecture is by nature a collaborative practice. So we are very interested in what the transition has been, what the differences are between the old world and the new world, and how architects are coping and what it means for the future of the market. So
if I just may interject for people that aren't super familiar, and that includes me with the architectural profession, when you say collaborative, who do you have in mind? Who's collaborating with who?
That's a very good question, Victor. So architects by nature have to collaborate with other architects, especially on large complex buildings. You have to collaborate in a team. But actually there's also, the delivery of buildings is an incredibly complex feat that we manage. And it's not just architects who are involved. There are politicians, there are planners, there are engineers, there are all sorts of different people from different professions who come together in order to deliver buildings. So collaboration is key, and it's the only way that we can deliver these buildings. So, rewinding now a few weeks, there was news of COVID-19 late last year, probably about November, December. Nobody took it very seriously. It slowly started to become more and more serious as we went through January. I think we had our first cases at the end of January, then we suddenly had some in February. Again, nobody was taking it particularly seriously. And then early March, the world changed overnight, and we realized that we had a global pandemic on our hands. Lots of people were going to die as a result of this. So working had to change. The working method had to change. And I think that the architecture industry has done quite a good job of being able to adapt to that very quickly and think on its feet. But remember something, that the construction industry, which obviously architecture is very interlinked, in the UK at least, it still goes on. People are still on site, they're still working in close proximity. So there was this period where, um, the architecture industry didn't really know how to respond to that, because you were managing projects on site, but you still had the builders on site working there, and architects were being asked to work remotely. And indeed, some firms didn't work remotely. Some firms continued to work from the office. Now, I'd like to hand over to you, Victor, and just tell us a little bit about what you think, the traditional architecture practice looks like.
Sorry, you're asking me what the traditional architecture?
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think? Well, how do you envisage it looking like? What's your idea of that?
So I have had a little bit experience, not finally building, but developing the concept for a project with some architects here. So that was my experience. And yeah, I don't know, a lot of diagrams, definitely not used to remote meetings, more comfortable in person, very good at meetings in person. But I don't know, what can I say? A lot of driving around to meet people in person. That's one part of it. Also, my big surprise about the architectural profession, what I didn't understand before I started working with an architect, is that an architect is effectively a building law lawyer, and that a huge part of what the architect does is figure out how to do stuff legally. And in fact, in certain environments or certain situations, arguably that's the harder part of the job. To take the customer's dreams and wishes and paint it in reality in something that the planners will approve.
I mean, it's interesting that you have that idea. That I guess that's one way of looking at the role of the architect. I mean, we have many different facets, and of course, we are the professional elements of the construction industry. So, it makes sense that you would associate us to solicitors and lawyers. Only, I think our role is a lot more complex than that. I think the contemporary architecture studio, firstly, scale really matters here. If you're a small boutique studio, you work in a very different way to a large corporate, multiple of hundreds employee company, okay? So the way that you react to this is very different dependent on which one you do. Now, often what's interesting is that the small design studio is still actually quite analog. It still works in hand drawing, model making. The collaborative process is actually very important to have that kind of human interaction and being there.
Really? People still start by making physical models, not everything in a computer, 3D, blah, blah, blah?
Absolutely, yeah.
Really, I did not know.
And this is that's physical models are a really key part of the design process, actually. And architecture firms that don't really engage in them really do suffer in the long term. You definitely need to, this discussion of analog versus digital. As good as digital tools get, the architect still needs to revert to the analog, because architecture is an incredibly human vocation, and you need to have that direct interface with the design. The moment you start to digitize design, you start to lose connection to the feeling of what you're designing, the space. You start to lose connection to the scale of what you're designing.
But if you have walkthroughs, and like now we're coming to the age of VR walkthroughs, would that not be much better than a model? you can see things like you can make yourself human size and see what things it will look like when you're human size.
They both have their place, so they're different things. You know, the VR model is actually much more of a representation tool once you have resolved the design. Yes, you can jump into it in VR and go, actually, you know, that space feels a bit pokey, or that space feels a bit big, and we can play about with that a little bit. But actually, that's very late in the design process, and the physical explorative model comes much earlier in the design process. Furthermore, you know, the truth is that physical models, people engage with them on a whole different level to how they would with a digital model. I mean, again, it's the importance of actually having a real object in person is for the purposes of communicating something is far more powerful and effective than a digital file.
But maybe that's because we're the generation that grew up on Lego. The generation that grows up on Minecraft will feel more comfortable with a virtual representation.
I mean, again, I think everybody can be comfortable with the virtual representation and totally understand it and manage to engage with it. But the feeling or the idea that I'm trying to evoke, I will not achieve as well with a digital tool as I could with an analog tool. But I think this comes back to actually what I'm leading on to here is I think the industry has responded really well to remote work. And I think it has something to do with the fact that actually, you know, we are very comfortable with abstraction. Okay, so architects communicate through drawing, architects communicate through, you know, through diagrams. And actually that translates incredibly well to working digitally, right, and remotely. And you know, we can do that. So yeah, I think an interesting kind of thing that I found was before I wouldn't have thought that we would have been able to collaborate as effectively remotely, just with regards to having that kind of conversation and being able to you know, really have a thrash out a design problem or have a jam together. Actually, I think it's been really successful, and I think it's opened up whole new worlds and whole new ways of doing things that we wouldn't have considered previously. So where would you like to take the conversation next, Victor? What's a burning question for you?
Yeah, so I'm interested, maybe go a bit more concretely. You said that you tried some collaborations and it turned out better than expected.
Yes.
Can you say a bit more of what was good, what surprised you that it was, or that what you hadn't considered that made the collaboration good?
Okay, well, you know, I'm just going to go in there and mention some software applications that we've been using recently that we've found incredibly useful. I think this Zoom, beyond all of its security issues, has actually been really fantastic. Its annotation tool and its share screen tool is brilliant. And, you know, I have, the studio has a project on site at the moment. And, you know, we are working collaboratively with a very diverse design team, which involves structural engineers, mechanical engineers, builders, architects, team of architects, and we're all working on this together. And we're able to have a Zoom conversation, share a drawing, and everybody is able to sketch over that drawing and communicate very effectively. And I think it's been great. And I think one of the really great things about working over something like Zoom is actually it enforces a certain level of respect of everybody who's talking, because it gives everybody an opportunity to talk. And I think the thing that you will find when people are in person, there are some characters who are more domineering and some characters who are you know, perhaps shyer and less able to have a voice. And I think the conversation can often be very one-sided, whereas with Zoom, there's a kind of accepted etiquette, right? If somebody's talking, everybody else is quiet.
Because actually, I was going to say in Zoom, if you have one person that's domineering, they could still dominate. So why do you feel it's different?
It's a good point, actually, Victor. But I would have thought that it's easier for somebody to interject with an idea, because again, I think there's this element of disconnection. So people who might feel a little bit shy or embarrassed to speak up in person might find it a lot more comfortable.
Interesting.
On something like Zoom. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, like I live on Zoom, and it's about half. Half it's people that aren't super familiar, and half it's people that are super familiar. So I can't tell anymore what's kind of like normal in my world, what's normal in the general world.
Yeah.
So what do you think, this is right now we're in emergency. People have been forced by the circumstances to stay at home and work remotely. What do you think the impact will be medium long term? So at some point the emergency will be over and some sort of a new normal. I think it's going to be different from the previous normal, but that's always true. This year is never like the last year. So what do you think this time that we spent this year collaborating all remotely, what impact will it have on the profession?
Well, I want to hear your side first. You are the remote work guru. So let's hear your idea in general, and then I'll relate that back to what I've observed in architecture and design studios.
So in general, I think it's kind of, where do I start? I think remote work goes very well hand in hand with kind of part-time work and what's often called a mosaic career. So and I think this is actually what architects often do anyways, but you don't working on one project, but you're working on multiple projects. And one of them might be something that you get paid good money for, but is not so exciting. And something else might be that you're super excited at, but it's not paying you money, a lot of money, or not paying you money now, or it's it's an investment, whether in your own learning or in the hope of profit in the future. And when you're not stuck in an office and all of your time isn't sold to one company and monitored, right? Of course, I know people do work on other projects from an office, but that's obviously stealing money from an employer. So not the norm, and it's hard. But when you're working remotely, it's very easy to, kind of work more flexibly. And I think it makes it easier. And so what happens then? You have this pool of people who are working flexibly, right? And they're open, the way you and I help each other, right? It's like, oh, I have this an idea. Can you give me some time to feedback on this? Or, you can have somebody work for a few hours on your project in return for equity or some promise for profits in the future. And this flexible kind of working means that it's possible for somebody that's a loan operator, a small company, if they manage to secure a big project, to bring together a larger group of collaborators than they have in employment, right? So now it's not about who do you have underemployed, right? It's about who do you have in your network that you can draw on. Who do you know and trust that you can pull into a collaboration, right? Like, for example, I'm working on this one project now, and the client's like, oh, we have this idea. Can we launch it quickly? Da, da, da. And I looked and I was like, well, we don't have the resources that we need. But then I was like, oh, I was talking to my one friend and I really like him. And I know he's a good specialist, and he just finished one project. He hasn't started another project. I know he's available this month. I know I trust him. I know how to work with him. I can pull him in for a few weeks or for a month to help me deliver this project to a customer. Whilst if my limitation was the people under my employ, I would for sure have to say, no, we don't have the people. So I think that's really cool, and that opens the way to very different ways of collaborating in a more fluid way. What do you think?
I think that's a really valid point. I just concerns me that it doesn't really apply to architecture, because part of the problem, and it could apply to other skills that an architect can have. And please remind me to talk about this if I forget. But just quickly on your point, the problem with architecture is that it's slow. Projects take a long time, and when you want to get clients' confidence in you to, I don't know, design HS2 or to design the next Houses of Parliament, right? They want a certain level of confidence that your team is going to be consistent and it's going to be stable over the next 5 to 10 years, because that's a reduction of risk for them. If you're having to re-recruit and employ people over and over again, if you're having to retrain people over and over again, suddenly you start to become very inefficient and you start to become expensive, and you also increase the risk profile of the client, because really development is all about risk mitigation. Okay, so I think it's going to work on a certain scale of project, but I think on other scales, I don't
Of
think.
course. I mean, like, I don't think, I usually work with smaller things and startups and things that move quickly. I think if you're talking about what the high-speed rail 2 or the Houses of Parliament, there's probably fingers of one hand architectural companies that have enough renown and all of this in all of UK to take on a project like this. Maybe fingers of two hands, right? That's not the bulk of, and probably for many of the people working on something like this, it's a once in a lifetime project, maybe twice, right? Like on something this big, like how many times does a project like this come around in your working life?
But remember, this is a big part of the employment market for architects. Is large
Building so many
infrastructural
Houses of Parliament.
Well, no, but the team on something like House of Parliament is going to be massive. It's going to be a big team of architects. There are only so. You've got on the other end of the scale, you've got the architect who's delivering house extensions, for example. Well, they make up a big part of the market as well, of the employment market, and they're normally sole practitioners and independent architects, but they're by no means the majority. There are large numbers of architects who will be working on these large, maybe not infrastructural even. You're talking about potentially big developments of 100+ homes. Even on those, the client's going to want to mitigate his risk to quite a high level, to ensure that he is buying into a team and he's buying into that resource that's going to have a stability. But
I don't know, like stability, they want to deliver on price to spec and with some creativity. I think, like I was a potential client, right? I was a developer on the project that I was talking to, right? And what did I look at? I looked at the website, I looked at the other projects that they developed on, and I talked to the guys, right? I didn't check the resumes of all of their architects, and I know that they're working on many other projects. So I didn't check that they're able to deliver what they said they're able to deliver. I trust them based on reputation, on things like this, right? And even if I did look at their architects' resumes, I don't have the capacity to evaluate them. So all I can judge them is the external of what do they deliver. Then the other thing is, I think what you're going to find through more flexible collaboration, because you can collaborate people certainly throughout your time zone, throughout your whole country, and probably globally, you can deliver projects much cheaper. And I would be surprised, there's so much that's moved to online, to remote. If you're talking about large projects, there's probably lots of monkey work there. And you can hire very competent architects in India or Pakistan or somewhere that will do the same work as you will for 1/5 the price probably and still be very, very happy that they're making a very good wage and excited to be working on a project in the UK, even if it just means they're laying down the I don't know, laying out the toilets or putting down the pipes. So
I mean, I think that's an oversimplification, really, of the industry, and you know, the idea of monkey work, I think, is probably quite a negative one, actually. Like, you know, I think
this
that
exists on any kind of in any kinds of work. There's stuff that has to be done repeatedly and needs to be done competently, but nobody loves.
yeah, absolutely. But remember that yes, there are capable people across the world in many parts of Asia and you know, Africa and South America, and you know, who are essentially going to be able to undercut the Western design firms. But remember as well that actually, I think you'll be surprised. Actually, I think the market is such that the Western design firms are probably running on a shoestring as it is. They're probably not that much more competitive, and the reason you pay the Western design firms is because they have the talent. They have the talent resource there, you know, and they can attract and retain that talent. I mean, that is really what a big architecture business is all about. It's about attracting and retaining talent, and then being able to you know, that is essentially your resource. It's human, and it's being able to take your human resource and apply it to projects in order to deliver consistent product to the client.
But I mean, you were at a big, I think at some point, a very big architectural firm, Ramsey, and now you're running your own company. So why?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Like, what?
Well,
How do you mean?
you make it sound as though big architectural companies are like the place to be, and it's really great, and it's not going to go away because it's really great. But obviously, it wasn't so great that you wanted to spend your whole life at one. So I'm
Well, I think that's a different topic, because like the big architectural company, what I'm saying is that that is the nature of the value that an architect brings to the business. Okay, it's talent, it's resource, it's reliability, it's risk mitigation. Right. This is the value of an architect in the machine, in the big cog. That's what his cog does. Right. And
I thought it was to make sure that the buildings look nice and didn't fall down on our heads. No way, the fall down on our heads is the engineer. Okay, look nice.
all right. Well, I mean, generally, you seem to have a very low opinion of architects, but I think that, you know,
it's not low. I mean, it's just very important. But I realized that the legal part was very big.
I'm just kind of saying, you know, where our position in the market actually is, and this is something that I'd like to kind of talk about, which is, you know, the position of the architect in the market has changed at every recession. And the value of the architect in the market has actually diminished at every recession. So this is a real issue, actually, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that the role of the architect on the other side of COVID-19 is probably going to change. And
in what ways?
And you might be right. The way it changes could be that, you know, suddenly you have the majority of the delivery of work is actually done remotely overseas by, you know, lesser paid international architects, and
it doesn't need to be over. It could be in the countryside, right? Like if I'm earning half of London wages and I'm living in Northern England, or countryside Wales, I have a better quality of life than I would living in London.
No, absolutely, but you know, let's look at this scenario of the remote delivery of buildings, right? And what that new world looks like. I think you're absolutely right. Like it's it suddenly is going to be a lot of out of work architects in the West because they're no longer needed, because people are going to discover actually a lot of the grunt work, a lot of the production work can be done by teams, you know, probably, by the way, massive warehouses with like 500 CAD technicians working in them somewhere in China, and, you know, 2 or 3 senior architects calling all the shots from the West somewhere, you know, running their firm and sending that over there, because you currently have that scenario, right? You have like render farms, right, which are, well, a render farm is the name of the hardware, but
I think for some work, yes, but you know, honestly speaking, I don't know how far we want to go to this, but I'm generally disappointed with the architectural profession. As a child that grew up a victim of brutalism, you know, and the concrete pillar boxes, I think architecture abandoned, like art, architecture abandoned humanity somewhere in the 1950s or 60s. So maybe this will be a chance for the architect to go back and to really focus more on the human side of buildings, right? And really see the value add is not just drawing buildings or whatever, because actually first it's going to be, you know, architects in cheaper markets, then it's going to be AIs, right? Like most of the modern buildings that I see around, you know, there will be AIs within 10 years who can generate that.
look, yeah, I think you're kind of right to some
So
extent.
maybe this means that, you know, the architect, and you know, we had this discussion a lot that, you know, the between architect and developer, the developer holds all of the cards because they hold all of the money, and the architect just draws the pretty pictures to realize the developer's vision, which oftentimes is driven by money and thus underwhelming in the end result. You know, maybe going into that space and changing how that is organized, going closer to the people and really focusing on the well-being is something that, you know, that will be the value add for architectural companies. I once talked to an architect at some cocktail party somewhere, and I asked him, oh, we had this conversation, why are so many buildings so bad, da da da, and he said, or I read somewhere, that 80% of the buildings are never visited by the architect after being built. And I was like, what craftsperson or art or whatever just puts stuff out and never actually try and experience it from the user point of view? That's pathological.
Well,
And
no,
value add that the local architect close to the client can do. They can go physically walk the site, you know, see the building afterwards and take responsibility for the actual lived experience or work of the user. Maybe.
I mean, look, I think it's sad that you have such a pessimistic and low idea of the architect and their purpose, but at the same time, I don't really want to get into an argument of defending the architects. I mean, I think it's really for every individual to kind of
No. I
stop
mean,
to appreciate that. You know, it's fine. You know, I think that's just how you view things, and good for you. Like, but you know, on a few of those points, I think actually the architect has probably never been so good for society. You know, you talk about the architect abandoning society in the 1940s or 1950s. Well, I don't agree with that. I think the architect
I just found a picture. This is the building I grew up in. Yeah, I have no love for architects. I mean, like,
but that's not an architect. This is exactly the problem. I mean, that is a building that an AI machine would develop for you, or that is a building that you know, a developer would lead.
In the 70s in Poland. I mean, you know, it's similar as the council housing in the UK, right?
No, not at all. Some of the council housing in the UK is absolutely wonderful architecture, and actually a lot of brutalism is wonderful architecture too. It's just
Some of it,
about,
a lot of it is really horrible, and some of it is easily flammable, but that's a different conversation. That's the
right.
engineering.
Yeah, I mean, but again, if you want to bring up Grenfell, you can see that actually the profession of architects is such that we have developed and refined our profession over the years, that we have become increasingly more regulated, and architects actually serve a very important purpose to make our cities safe, to make our buildings function
Yeah, I think
properly, to make our
in terms of the buildings not falling down on people's heads, we got that problem solved. That's, I agree. I think many people should appreciate that more.
Yeah, anyway, so I mean, I guess you just don't want to hear the point, so I'll just leave it. Look, I think ultimately, looking at this future of the architects and where they might find themselves off the back of COVID-19, I think you're absolutely right. I think lots of architects, unless they learn to adapt very quickly, are going to become redundant. Okay, and I think the model that I can see coming off the back of remote work is, in fact, great big warehouses crammed with CAD technicians somewhere out in East Asia. A team of elite designers in the West, a small, tight team of elite designers in the West, giving instruction to those big offices or warehouses, and that being how buildings are produced. And I think that that's actually where the remote work element is taking us. Whether AI or not is going to do that, I don't think so. I think the AI is going to, and the technology is definitely going to replace probably, I don't know, 50% of architects, because there are lots of architects out there who are essentially kind of flotsam, right? They're floating away with the river, and they are the market has reduced them to the opinions that you express about them. But actually, it's the architects who kind of recognize their value, and who are able to apply themselves and actually position themselves properly in the future, who will succeed and who will flourish and carry on.
So how do you see this new reality as being an opportunity for a small studio like yourself, like Nooma?
Well, I mean, this is where we value ourselves on Nooma is an innovation studio. So we value ourselves on our ability to innovate, our ability to think critically, our ability to synthesize, many different complex disciplines, and bring them all together to provide solutions to real problems within society and cities. And, we are architects and designers who really do value ourselves and understand what our value is to the market. So I think we're going to do very well, actually. And, I think as a collaborative platform, what we do is prior to COVID-19, we were working collaboratively remotely as a a conglomerate of designers and thinkers anyway, and I think we've kind
of the model that I was arguing for, and now you were saying that it's not a good one.
No, not at all. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying it's a bit dystopic. I really do think we are going to revert to the idea of mass production in the Far East at economical costs, with design studios like Nooma, who are going to have the specialized technical knowledge in particular sectors to be able to direct and deliver projects remotely using that resource. I really do think that that's where the future's going. I personally don't think it's great. I think it's I think it's very inhuman, but the problem is that we are products of a market that is driving things a particular way, and a market that is constantly looking for cost savings and efficiency.
So here, I would like to disagree with you, because you seem to have this image that, you know, remote work or outsourcing means sweatshops. That's kind of at least what I heard between the lines. You know, there's 500 people doing CAD in an unheated warehouse that used to be a garment factory before, probably. But and that's certainly possible. I think if somebody has that attitude, they can do that. You should probably remember that those people working in that CAD workshop, even if they're making, you know, they're probably making 3, 4, 5 times the national average in a job which is safe because it's not a garment factory. And actually, a lot of those people might be quite happy doing that job. So we should appreciate that. On the one hand. On the other hand, you know, I've been building international collaboration for a long time. And for me, collaborating at the distance is the exact opposite. Because if you try and specify things remotely to a really fine detail, that takes a long time. Also, it's, you know, there's always things mess up. So instead, what I do is I build up a network of trusted collaborators. And whether they're in Africa or in Asia or in Japan or in the United States, that's just, you know, it's a time zone issue. But to me, they're all people whose professionalism I trust and respect, and people who I know that when I have a conversation and we have an agreement, oh, we need to do this, I know that they will, you know, make a series of decisions which is right for the customer, for the product, for the problem, without me needing to tell them. So I actually believe that good remote collaboration is the opposite of this, you know, factory warehouse. It's having people who you can really trust to make the right decisions. And this is actually what I discovered doing international collaboration. And, you know, for me, certain places in Asia that I worked with were really tough. And I think they're great people. I think they're very smart. But I think the culture of what's good enough, of what's done, is very different. And we're all products of our culture, and that made the collaboration tough. But once you have those people who you have, you know, built a shared quality standard with, a shared set of expectations, done some projects, then you can rely on them to do the right thing. And because you have less communication bandwidth remotely than when you do when you're co-located, I think you need a higher trust in people doing the right thing without being told what to do than you do when you're co-located. But
Yeah,
that's a different model, you know. I'm just saying it's possible.
I agree with you, Victor, but I think the point I'm making is that it's niche. Like, this only works for 0.001% of the population. I mean, you know, we've got 7 billion people on the planet, and you cannot expect all 7 billion to suddenly start collaborating and working successfully.
There's 2 billion people stuck at home now, and probably at least 50% of them are doing some kind of remote collaboration.
Okay, it's 15% of the global population then. You know, it's like there's still a lot of people who aren't going to benefit from that. And I think the problem is
I agree. I fully agree. And for me, a fundamental part, what I believe about the future, is that the future is going to be much more heterogeneous, at least for the next 50 years. It's going to be much more heterogeneous than the 20th century. I think the 20th century was kind of like pretty, you know, everybody goes to an office on the same train, and this, we're all industrial serfs. I think going forward, I don't think offices are going to disappear. I don't think, like you say, you know, for a certain thing, you need 500 architects in your office, and nothing smaller will be able to build you the next airport. but there is lots of projects which aren't that. So I think there'll be a big variety of different kind of new forms of organizing going forward. And if they only work for 0.1 of the population, if that's 0.1 of the 7 billion people, that's still a lot of people. And I certainly, I'm not here pushing general solutions. I don't believe I've got the solution to all of the world's problems, but I think this idea of working remotely as equals and finding professionals wherever they may be to collaborate with, irrespective of where people live physically, I think they will empower many teams. But yes, I mean, factories will go on, many big companies will go on as always for at least the next 20, 30 years.
Mm. And I think it's really interesting what you say. And I think for me, what this conversation has really brought up is a question of leadership and how leadership adapts to remote work. Okay, because I think not only do people need to develop their own leadership of themselves and their own, and be independently led, but also I think you're never going to escape the fact that people need leaders, right? And
Yes,
I think,
if I may speak to that, sorry to interrupt you. For me, I fully agree, and actually, I think for me, it's this switch from what I call management to leadership. So management is exactly that, telling people what to do, breaking up the work, telling what to do, and the manager knows what they should do and supervises them and checks the output of their work. As opposed to what I consider leadership, and of course they're often mixed, and certainly any good manager is a leader, but there's, I think, many managers who aren't leaders. In leadership, you inspire people to work according to a certain set of values and to a certain quality level and on certain projects. So you get people excited about what they're going to do, you pick the right people, and then you trust them to do the best job possible. I think it's well.
I think you're going to be easy on the leader there, aren't you? Because it's also up to the leader to actually deliver results and put food on the table. And the problem is where if you get a situation where you've got the blind leading the blind, you have a recipe for disaster, because you have a lot of people.
This is why we're searching for the one-eyed man. This is most days. This is what I consider myself. I'm the one-eyed man.
That you've got potentially a massive disaster on your hands, because you've got people who are essentially, not fulfilling their lives. They are lost. They are lost, and they are not executing and delivering and achieving anything. And I think that is a real problem that this whole remote work idea brings up, and might be the nail in the coffin for remote work. I think it could very well be.
I see it the other way. I think, many people call me a communist, but in this sense, I'm a proud, strong believer in capitalism. The beauty of capitalism is that companies fail and but the whole system goes on because there is enough different companies. So what I think will happen is certain young companies or young organizations, it might be, this kind of more collaborative things, will leverage remote work to start producing things effectively. At first, it might be small projects, you're right. But then sometime within our lifetimes, this kind of looser collective of architects, designers, and it might also include community designers, might also include people designing online stuff, will get a big project. It might not be HS2, that's a very technical project, but it might be the Houses of Parliament, the Houses of the Parliament for the new thing where which is more participative, which is more whatever, and includes not just designing the building, but designing the software and all of this in an integrated way. And good luck finding an architectural office that'll be able to do that. The future of government today. But I could envision I'm not saying it will happen, but I could envision a collective of people who are expert in very different areas coming together on a project like this. But for sure, it will start with small projects. And, I see in general this whole future of work, whether it's remote work or non-hierarchical organization, there's many parts, there's many different remote work movements. I see this as the dinosaurs versus the mammals. So the mammals started out as little shrews, little mouse, right? Like this big running around. Where are the dinosaurs today? And I think, but of course there was a transition period. In that case, it was millions of years. Here, I think it'll be maybe decades. And the big companies will be around and the small ones to still figure things out. And then the new ways of working will grow and grow and grow and eventually supplant. Just the same way as, we moved from agricultural-based economy to an industrial-based economy. It wasn't like one day everybody picked up, left the farm and went to the city. So probably for some people at certain points it felt like that. It took decades, like 50 years or something was the transition, 100. And we went from at the beginning of the 20th century, we had like 50, 60, 70% of the European population working in farms to what are we at, 2 or 3% now?
I guess maybe the problem is that it just, by the way, I think it's very, it's very beautiful what you said, and I actually really agree with you. But I think the problem with it a little bit is that it feels like we've gone back to 2003, doesn't it? The idea of kind of sitting down on MSN or Yahoo Chat or Skype and communicating with people from behind a computer. We kind of did that, decided it wasn't very good, dropped it, and went back to wanting to work in co-working spaces and creating cool collaborative Google type offices and Apple offices
but every technology, everything has its time, right? And for, like we all are, and I saw you playing with your phone too, right? We're all addicted to this thing. There were 15 or 20 years of failed technology attempts to make this happen. Before the iPhone, Microsoft had their phone, Nokia had smartphones. There were so many different attempts, right, to introduce this idea into the market, but we weren't quite ready. And like some people, maybe 99% of the people, like you say, tried this remote stuff in 2003 and then went back to the office. But some of us stayed on. I've been working remotely for over 10 years and have been polishing the practices and rituals and how to make this happen. And now we have a body of knowledge of how to facilitate virtual meetings, how to do this, right? So I do believe that in 2003 we didn't, and by we I mean humanity as a whole, right? Or in the kind of more general zeitgeist, right? There are probably a few experts on remote work in 2003 that had an idea, but now there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of them around the world, enough to really seed a lot more people moving into the new way of collaborating.
Well, Victor, you make a very good case, and I must say that I think where I can definitely agree with you is that we are moving into a new era. I do think that the era of remote work will become more of a thing, and whether it's a good thing or not, I don't know. I think it's up for debate. Whether it's going to last very long, whether it's going to be a fad, I think is also up for debate. But I don't disagree with you at all that it will definitely be a thing for some time to come.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't get a chance to talk about the benefits today. I don't think we'll have time. Maybe we can talk about it some other time. And of course, everything has pluses and minuses, and every technology takes adjustment time. It took society time to adjust to the telephone. I still think we're only starting to really adjust to the internet, and there is much more to come. In 1999, 1996, nobody imagined Uber. I don't even think Steve Jobs imagined Uber when he launched the iPhone. So it takes time for technologies to work their way through society,
Mm.
and for a society to really learn how to deal and adapt with a technology. Same thing as with electricity, right? Like when Edison or they're making the light bulb, nobody was thinking of computers. When people were starting to make computers, nobody was thinking of smartphones. You know, when they were making GPS, they weren't thinking of Google Maps.
Mm.
So I believe that there is, you know, the arc of technology, somebody discovers something that seems kind of neat or applicable for a particular use case, and then people start developing more and more and more different uses for that technology, and it becomes more ubiquitous, and people learn how to use it, and you know, more people's imagination is applied to it. You know, now you have nurses online, now you have doctors online. There is so much, and maybe architecture needs to figure out. And I'm not saying that the whole workflow will necessarily benefit from remote work. There might be certain things which it just doesn't make sense, but there could be certain parts of, you know, customer meetings or, like you suggested, reviews, which actually work even better online.
Mm.
So I think it's not about trying to do everything online. Like now it's pathological, right? You have to do everything online because we're in the quarantine and all of this. And of course that's tough. But after, you know, the quarantine ends, if more people are familiar with it, you'll have a choice. And every time, you know, you need to talk to somebody, you'll think through, is this the kind of a meeting where it's really worth me driving, taking the tube or whatever across town to do this with this person or with these people, or can we do it equally well online? And I think for sure you will go to some meetings in person and you will value them that much more. And those people, when you actually go and not like ask them for a Zoom call, but they're like, I'm going to go and see you in your office, they appreciate that you're going to talk to them about something important because you're dragging your ass halfway across town to see them. So hybrid is the answer. It's not all one way or all one another, but learning how we can use these new capabilities and where they're useful, where they're not.
Absolutely, Victor. I think hybrid is the answer.
Cool.
And this comes
blended life. In learning, they call it blended learning. I don't know what it's going to be called in other things, but cool. All right. Well, I think for me, this is good for today. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I think we've had a much longer one than we were expecting today.
As always.
But I think we could go on for another 5 hours, couldn't we, Victor? Let's save some for the next show.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Good to see you.